When they said the question will be moderated, does not mean the questions have to be moderate. I like argument, I like contradiction, I like people that question what I've said, so don't give it a thought. What I want to do today is to talk about some serious general things that I think are important in general. I want to talk about the connections between entrepreneurship and democracy, why those are closely allied. And then in the question period, I'd be more than pleased to talk about that or about entrepreneurship in California or venture capital or what might interest you beyond just the general subject I want to talk about. But about a year ago, I had a chance to give a talk in Russia at a venture fair. And at the time, there was a lot of questioning in Russia about whether democracy was really going to be fostered there. At the same time, they were trying to encourage entrepreneurship. So I gave a little talk, which is not exactly the same as this one, but some of the ideas are the same, about the connection between the two and how democracy itself was an ideal worth pursuing, and that entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial climate help that aim. So I was on the platform with one of Mr. Putin's ministers, the Minister of Industry and Science, very fine man. But it was a minor speech in a minor meeting, so I knew I wasn't going to get in trouble by pushing democracy. Shouldn't have to be in trouble anyway. So after the speech, the minister who was sitting next to me said, that was a good speech. And then he said, very timely. And so I thought I wasn't going to be in trouble at that, but I knew I wouldn't be in trouble. But by the way, when I'm done, I might forget it, I made some copies of an article that was more or less a direct transcription of that speech. And what I'm going to say tonight is a little bit different, but if anybody's interested in reading that, those things are right there. I didn't know much about the technology management program until I got some information from Bill Grant earlier on. Today I just had a wonderful talk with some of the people running the program, and I certainly applaud UC Santa Barbara for having the foresight to have a program which integrates a lot of different disciplines. One message I got for sure today from people all the way from the science to the business people is UC Santa Barbara is very proud of the fact that while it has experts in many fields, a part of the mission of this place is to bring that expertise together and form new knowledge and the ability to give students a chance to work with professors who are talking to each other. Because you're here, you may not realize this, but in some schools it's very difficult to get the business school to talk to the engineering school. I come from that school, Stanford University, and it's very difficult in the entrepreneurial area, which I taught at Stanford Business School. It's very hard to get the finance guys to talk to the accounting guys. Well, they talk to each other, but to the marketing people or the administrative practices, there was a lot of silos, and in the entrepreneurial program, which is kind of an orphan, involved integrating those different disciplines together. So those of us teaching in the entrepreneurship program were not thrilled all the time, although it got much, much better with the thought that these were different subjects, and entrepreneurship, of course, is a subject of itself. Anyway, the key point I want to make for the evening is that entrepreneurship and democracy are closely linked, because there are two elements of personal freedom. I think the three important freedoms for all of us, I won't get any argument about this, I don't think, is that personal freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom are terribly important things. And the assertion I would make is they're not really different. They're all facets of the same diamond that every American and people around the world in general treasure. So the entrepreneurs are really revolutionaries in a sense, because they want to change the way things are being done. So they want to challenge the economic structures of a country, and they do, the social structures and the political structures. And Because I was in Russia speaking when I first got the idea, I loved calling them revolutionaries. And it turned out, I didn't know this, but the word revolutionary now, because of the bad experience they had for the young people, is a bad word. They don't like the idea of revolutionaries, and they're not happy about or even excited about what happened in 1917. They're thinking about what's happening will be happening in 2007, and to them, 1917, all those people who rushed around in the streets who were heroes for a long time they're part of history and not a particularly heroic group. But in talking about economic freedom, and in freedoms in general, the one caution that has to be exhibited is that in encouraging freedom, this includes economic freedom, one person's freedom, of course, can't unduly diminish the freedom of the next person. So every country has laws that that do not permit, I shouldn't say it this way, that prevent us from carrying on activities that interfere too much in the freedoms of other people. And I'm going to make this general point because it applies to economic freedom as well. So entrepreneurs, the basic job of an entrepreneur is to serve a marketplace, often with new technology or just with new ideas, so that by pursuing economic freedom, they are promoting the political freedom that comes from a new generation of people having power and noise and notoriety in any society. The things they're doing all the time, without even trying to do it or without meaning to do it, is to challenge the economic status quo. When you and some of you in this room will certainly become entrepreneurs and go off to start your own businesses, whether they're technology or you will be challenging people for their money, for existing markets. You may be challenging established companies. You may be challenging some technology that's not quite as good as yours and causing change in the society. And it's the interesting thing about it, the way I like to think about it, is that they give consumers wider choices. And so in a very real sense, the consumers get to vote with their dollars whether your company will succeed or not. And if it doesn't succeed, it probably is because, well, can be several reasons, but one basic reason is the product wasn't as good or wasn't sold as well, or sometimes, unhappily, you just didn't have enough money to even get it going properly. But business skills and markets should be the primary determinant of success of young companies, but some countries, so far not us too much, impose such restraints on starting new companies, bureaucratic nightmares in getting companies registered, determining what markets that you can serve. You can, except for very rarely, you can start a company to go into almost any market of need that our citizens have. Obviously, some restrictions on entrepreneurial activity have to be imposed to keep people from interfering in the lives of others too much. But a minimum of these limitations is vital so that the marketplace and the individual people can decide which companies succeed and which don't. And I would assert also that if you begin to restrict economic freedom too much and make it difficult for people to start companies or to serve certain markets, you're unconsciously, perhaps, infringing on the other freedoms of political freedom and personal freedom because they are so closely allied the way I see it. Some limitations are obvious. I mean, you can't, starting a great company to perform murder for hire, that's probably against the public interest and is probably forbidden in not every, but just about every country. Antitrust laws are good in general. You can't start a company, or you're protected if you start a company from antitrust behavior, in most cases, from bigger companies. Certainly we impose in our country restrictions on what substances you can sell. That's constantly subject to questioning about what should be sold and what shouldn't be sold in the way of different kind of substances, drugs, and other ones. When you regulate markets too much, though, you are taking away from the people who consume products the ability to determine which companies succeed. My own view is that people that live in democracies should exercise their political will to make sure that their natural freedom to make their own economic decisions remain with them and are not made by what I call wise people in a central place. That central place, we all know where that is. It's 3,000 miles east of here on the Potomac. Some people do believe that centralized decision-making by the federal government, let alone the Sacramento government, is a good thing. And I suppose in some areas, of course, it is vital that decisions be made on behalf of all the people by a central government. But economic decisions and the determination of what market should be served should not be one of those things the way I see it. So anyway, any society has to find a balance among these different freedoms. And sometimes we talk about other freedoms from want and freedom from the right to education and health care. Those are important matters, but they're derivative in most cases from a successful economy. So that entrepreneurs help produce a successful economy, and the rest of the freedoms, in my view, are derivative of it. One interesting number was developed at MIT about 20 years ago, but I think it's probably generally true, and that is that all the net new jobs in the United States are created by companies less than 10 years old. So the big companies shrink and the big companies grow, but they don't produce the new jobs. The new jobs are produced by young companies, and those young companies, of course, are recent entrepreneurs by definition. Look at Yahoo's now more than 10 years old, but look at Google. Google's growing. I don't know how big it is now. It must have several thousand employees. It didn't have any a few years ago. And other young companies that you know are creating jobs. Now Amgen, the company I've been involved with, is more than 10 years old, and they're still growing fast. They're still creating jobs, but for a long time when it was less than 10 years old, it created 8,000 or 9,000 jobs in those 10 years. So young companies are important. Young companies are the products of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs have to be free to serve the markets that they want to serve. I want to make this point about entrepreneurship fostering democracy, because the creation of new wealth and economic power by a new generation of people, some of whom are here, all of whom are here, I mean, all of you will have this opportunity, those of you who are students anyway, they create turbulence in a society. Gee, is that bad? Is turbulence bad? No, it's really not bad. Turbulence is good where the status quo of the society and of the economic system is challenged by people who can do things better. This is not some left-wing statement at all. You could consider it a very conservative statement. I don't want to have it characterized one way or the other. I just would assert to you that entrepreneurs do a great job of shaking up the joint, and if it isn't done every generation or so, the place gets stratified, stagnated, and economic growth does not provide the new jobs and the quality of life that most societies want to have. I didn't invent these ideas. Some pretty good social scientists named von Mises, Hayek, and Schumpeter thought this up decades ago, but I think their theories have been well proven. Now, in countries which have given up on government ownership of most businesses recently, which is most of the old socialist states, entrepreneurs have been strong forces there promoting the other aspects of freedom as they go. I go to Russia quite a bit. The entrepreneurial system there is quite strong. There's dozens of companies being started. There's plenty of problems in Russia which we could all tell each other here tonight. But the fact is that Russia is a very strong entrepreneurial society. You hardly have to talk about China. I mean, it's built into the psyche of that country once it was freed, finally, of the idea that people shouldn't own businesses. There's tens of thousands of businesses started every year in China. China is a great place, but for some reason or other, it has not translated yet into political freedom at any great depth or personal freedom. You can't say everything you want to say in China. You can't really vote in any effective way. But I do think the movement is in that direction. It may seem glacial, and so the linkage between, which I've been busily asserting here for the last 10 minutes, between economic freedom, which is widespread in China, and political and personal freedoms is loose, but I would predict I will predict openly, since this is an open forum, that it will not be all that much longer because before you will begin to see a greater degree of freedom of speech and a greater degree of elections in China. It cannot be with tens of thousands of entrepreneurs earning good money, spending money and becoming an important part of that society. China has kept some industries, some businesses off limits to people in that society. The entire natural resources area is all government in China. They're very short of oil, by the way, and they may change that, but transportation, generally speaking, is entirely public. So the entrepreneurs are plenty free to build products of all kinds, consumer products and industrial products, but natural resources, transportation, and certain kinds of communications are, especially when the government wants to control what's said, are the purview of the government, and you can't start and do anything you want to in those fields. One important qualification, though, about asserting how important entrepreneurs are and how linked they are to our other freedoms is it's based on the assumption that just about everyone in the society from the beginning has an opportunity to take part in this economic freedom. One of the pillars of our country, I believe, has been that education has been available to just about everyone, that everyone has a chance, maybe the odds are less for one group than the next, to move ahead in society. I've backed a couple of hundred companies in my 40 years as a venture capitalist, and I cannot see any correlation. I can see a correlation between education, for sure, but I haven't seen too much of a correlation between family prosperity and success as an entrepreneur. However, I do realize that getting education is been harder for some socioeconomic groups in our country than for others, but I have seen success from every group of immigrants, from every part of our society in terms of economic or socioeconomic origins, and I haven't seen any particular bias toward people who have a lot of money to start with. The guys and the women that come into the business with a bunch of money don't do any better. In fact, some of them make a small fortune out of a big one by getting into the entrepreneurship business. In Russia, just to comment on that a minute, they have had widespread education, and they are slackening on their investment in education in that country, and I think the effects are being shown. But I would say that, I'm going to get to this a little bit later in this talk, we are facing a kind of a crisis. It's a little bit longer coming, of being sure that education not only available, but that the students who are moving into the K-12 era have enough interest in and have enough ability to begin to study and learn and move up the ladder in education. But broadly based education is just one of the things that has to be present, in my view at least, to have a climate which fosters entrepreneurs, whom I believe are very important, as you've long since heard from me. One is a pool of talent and knowledge. One of the things that's let the United States lead the pack is we have research institutions, major ones, including this very university in whose halls we sit, plus Stanford and Cal and a bunch of others in the state, and UCSB, SD's got it. Well, the whole university system, just to not be too specific, is an important, greatly important element of our pool of talent and knowledge in this state and in the country as well. The pool of talent and knowledge includes a flow of engineers and even of technicians. California is blessed because we have a great university system with some fine private universities. We have the state college system, which turns out terrific engineers, and also we have the community colleges, which do a terrific job. 108 colleges enrolling about 2 million people who, over in a year's time, who provide the technology. Many of them take technology training, and the important people who do the technology work in our companies are often products of the community college system. But anyway, I just would say that this pool of talent and knowledge is one important factor. Another one is that we have to have moderate tax rates. You can hear all the noise from Washington you want to about cutting taxes here or raising taxes there, but in general in the world, the United States has fairly modest tax rates, and it is an important part of why we have lots of entrepreneurs. The availability of venture capital is an important factor as well in the entrepreneurial climate. The venture capital, which we could talk about for a couple of days, is basically the job of providing capital and assistance to companies. A lot of people think of venture capital as being the investment business. Investment is just part of what venture capitalists do. Much of what they do is to give guidance, help, encouragement, enthusiasm, name a bunch of ways to help people. But venture capitalists are supposed to do all those things, and that's how venture capital is differentiated from other forms of investment. It's a highly involved trade in which puts money and all those other investment and advice into companies. Some other areas, you have to have commercial banks around. Those people with the teller machines, they have other functions, and one of them is to lend short-term money to companies so they can work through temporary cash requirements. It's readily available in our country. We don't even think about it much, although for small businesses it has been difficult. And so a group of banks finding a market have taken a lot of trouble to serve smaller businesses. In the early days of the last century, a guy named Giannini, who invented the Bank of America, thought up the fact that you had to back small businesses. And the Bank of America, while not doing it so much now, was the financial backbone of many, many, many young companies, some of which are now great companies. I won't go through all the bank names, but it is an important part of the banking business now to provide short-term financial requirements for entrepreneurial companies. And to give credit to the investment bankers, they can help provide larger amounts of money when companies are growing, either from going public or finding large, big-time investors for companies after the venture capital level of investment is run out. We have to have a good system of laws and courts, protection of intellectual property and other private property. We take this for granted. It's hardly worth mentioning, but there's plenty of countries where you don't have protection for your business, where you don't have good protection of your intellectual property. And so we have to have laws that let us create entities that work like corporations. I'm sort of preaching to the choir on some of this, but it's good for us every so often to realize what are the elements in our society that promote entrepreneurship in the way it's promoted. Even having bankruptcy procedures is an important factor. It means that if someone fails, you don't go to jail. You don't spend the rest of your life trying to work your way out of $1 million hole. There is ways of restarting in this country, and many other countries too. So, the laws and the framework of laws in which we operate is very, very important. One thing I want to point out, though, and I started to get on this, and this is something I've added to some of the other stuff that I wrote about. Our prosperity has been promoted for the last 150 years or more by two important pillars. These two pillars have been a large and growing population of people trained in science, engineering, and technology. The rate of growth of that pool of people in this country is slowing. It's not shrinking, but it's not growing as fast as it was. And for those of you, since it's an engineering class, I can say the second derivative is negative of the size of our pool of talent and knowledge. The head of Caltech, with whom I sit on the board of directors, Amgen, asserts that it is not only is already leveled off, that the pool starting in this year of people trained in those high level of science, technology, and engineering is no longer even growing at all, let alone growing at a slower rate. So whatever it is, we need to do something, and we can do something rather rapidly, I think, to open up, incentivize, widen the number of educational opportunities for people to take technology training. We can't really, we've been ahead for a long, long time because you've led the world in technology and science. Not necessarily always in science, though, but our engineering professions who take science from the laboratory into the marketplace has been very strong here for a long, long time, and it is not as strong as it used to be. The other one is a little bit longer term, but it's a chicken that's going to come home to roost. And that is that for the first time again in our country's history, we have a shrinking part of the population who's actually taking advantage of getting advanced technical training or advanced education or higher level education. We have a growing segment of the society which does not move ahead into advanced education or in advanced technical training, however you want to put it. There's a growing number of people who simply do not get well educated. Will take a while for us to feel this, but what concerns me about this particular subject is that if a very large bunch of people cannot either have the entrepreneurial system available to them or find the good jobs or fill the good jobs that come from new companies and high technology, then we're going to have more and more calls for greater activity in Washington, greater interference in economic freedoms, because they won't mean so much to people. We'll have a greater and greater population that says, I want the government to do more. I cannot participate in this society fully because I don't have the training, I'm not getting it. And one reason they're not getting it is because we don't start early enough to getting people on the track of good education. I realize there's family problems here, there's all kinds of reasons this doesn't occur, but here's an area where the federal government can at least lead the way. I don't think they have to do everything financially. I think the state and local governments and a roused population can concentrate on education, but we all know we have a problem with education in our country. And the two facets of it that I see, and I'm sure there are many more by people better trained than I, are a lack of growth of our technical community, technical, scientific, and engineering community, and a shrinking number of people who are taking advantage of advanced education at all. If we don't do something about this, I don't think it'll affect us immediately, but look at the competitors we have in the world now. We have China, it's educating engineers at a very, very high rate. And India, they're both great countries, they're big populations who are putting the money into building engineering. I don't have the numbers of how many engineers are graduating in China, but they're putting a huge effort in the training of science and engineering, and so is India. So we are, Western Europe has, for many years, has had strong science, but because of a lack of emphasis on entrepreneurship and a lack of emphasis on what I think of as economic freedom, they haven't kept up in the formation of new companies and the growth of their economies. They have a whole set of other problems. But our competitors in the next 10, 15, 20 years are going to be India and China, and it isn't a military, although it may end up with some military confrontations, but the main thing they're going to compete is for world markets, where our products will not necessarily be the best around. And don't count Japan out either. They've been going slow, but they also have a tremendous rate of training of science and technology, and they also have a very high percentage of their population which is being educated. Well, okay, so I'm telling you about all this danger. What can we do about it? What can any of us do about it? I think without getting into the techniques of delivering these things or getting into the arguments about liberals, conservatives, and all that, really I think of as nonsense in terms of trying to label everything with something, we do have to insist that politicians addressing us and seeking our votes put education high on their agendas. There's lots of problems we have, but unless the men and women you're voting for in Congress and in our state legislature seem to understand, seem to be interested in education as a primary objective of what the government should be doing, and setting up incentive programs, setting up ways in which our education system can be improved from the very beginning of life and immediately later on in the technical and scientific and engineering professions, then we can affect by being active with our politicians and vote for those people who say things that make sense to us. I must say this, though. We have, what, 50 people here? But we're not the only people aware of this. There are going to be, I hope, some politicians arising who can see this. I think everyone sees it, who can see that the voters will respond to interest in education and emphasizing education as a primary national aim. So just in conclusion of this part of what I wanted to say is that if the legal system permits it and the customs are there and there's a climate of approval for entrepreneurs, which we certainly do have in our country, even some are even heroes, they will form businesses and will move the economy ahead. There are other conditions that foster entrepreneurs I've already talked about, and governments can help reinforce those conditions, especially in the research and education area. But by being able to exercise their economic freedom, they reinforce those other freedoms of political and personal freedoms that we hold so dear. And if we ever vitiate economic freedom in any great way, we will see the related results of a diminution of our political and economic political and personal freedoms as well. I like to think of them in a dramatic way as the revolutionaries of our time, not in the sense of overthrowing our society, overthrowing our constitution or our government, but in keeping our economy, keeping our social system in changing and being reflecting the wishes of the people. The voting people do that. People also voting with their money to buy products and are others who can affect this change. So they're revolutionaries. I applaud entrepreneurs. I've worked with them for 40 years, and it's some of the most exciting people I know are people who have the ability and the courage to step out in front and lead. So that's what I want to say for the moment. So thank you very much. I want to pause there. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, but I will take some time, if someone leaves it with a question, particularly talk about where the venture capital business is now in our state, in our communities here, and in the United States. But would someone like to take me on in some of those assertions I just made? Yes, here's who would like to take me on. All right. You have to tell us who you are, though.
Hi, my name is Ray Colby, and it's nice to see you again, Pitch. And
I know who you are. That's right.
And I'm glad that you came here and gave this lecture. However, you indicated that research institutions have facilitated the leadership role of the United States, but you also stated that the number of engineering students, is in the decline in the U.S. But if you look at the situation, I mean, one of the difficulties that we have is that economic freedom has allowed corporations to outsource a number of technical jobs to countries like Russia, China, and India, where they have a strong technical base. So how do you respond to that? I mean, it seems to me it's the economic freedom itself that has facilitated the outsourcing of jobs.
First of all, I didn't say exactly what you said I said, so I didn't say that the number of students was shrinking. What I really was saying was the data are, and I have heard this from enough people who know the data better than I, that the total pool of people you'd call scientists, engineers, and technicians in our society is no longer growing it's a shrinking rate of growth. So it isn't that we don't have the students, although in the end that will determine that. But the outsourcing problem is what Ray is bringing up. It really depends how much you think about international free trade as being important. If you think about markets as being world markets, and they should be served by the people best able to serve them, I see it as a different problem from there is plenty of demand for engineers here. Yes, you can always hear about some guy who couldn't get a job, and I know that. But the fact is that if we're going to continue to grow, we need people who can create new products. The outsourcing of help desks and that stuff is widespread, and whenever you call somebody for assistance, you get somebody in India. I mean, we've all gone through that, and then you try to understand them. But it's effective, it's cost effective, it's built a very strong economic system in India, which, by the way, is importing tons of our stuff. I'm a little bit leery of trying to say, if we try to have too many restrictions on international trade in the long run, then we probably, our own society, will not be going down the directions where we're best. Now, in some cases, you're right, it is just hiring people that do stuff cheaper. But in some cases, it's representing a world balance of trade which enables us to concentrate our efforts on things we do better. What do we do better? We do science better. We do the kind of engineering that is not the routine final design of a product, which is being outsourced, but the translation of science combined with marketing into product ideas and company ideas. So that's, to me, is where we will end up. Silicon Valley itself is a good example of how it's been transformed by the very phenomenon that you mentioned. Silicon Valley, in the 60s, when it was inventing itself, was a place where you had 2 and later on 3 great research universities providing science and highly trained scientists and technicians. You had 2 or 3 fine state colleges, San Jose State, Hayward State, San Francisco State, who were providing engineers. They didn't do research, but they provided a great flow of talented, able engineering people. Then you had the community colleges. We've been through that story a few minutes ago. So Silicon Valley started off with a place where companies were developed, where they were financed because venture capital grew up there as well, where people built companies that had manufacturing, engineering, marketing, and everything else. Then came the big boom of people building unreal companies and trying to make money from financial manipulations alone, which was characteristic of the late 1990s. And then so Silicon Valley went into a decline. When it came back, and it did not come back with lots of manufacturing jobs. They went elsewhere. They went to other states. It isn't only, you mentioned Russia and Mexico and China and places. Some did go there, but plenty of jobs went down to lower cost regions of our own country in a kind of a natural flow. So the total number of jobs in Silicon Valley did not come back. It stayed low. It stayed lower, but what came back was the number of companies being formed, the number of companies being financed, the number of higher level engineering and scientific jobs, science in the case of biotech and high level engineering in the case of information technology. So Silicon Valley is kind of a microcosm of the country, because the country has come back pretty nicely from the dog days of 2000 and 2001, leaving aside the national security issues and that, but I'm talking about the economy. So my own view is it probably would not be a good idea to do much in the way of interfering with international trade. There's things about international trade where we will be unable to keep ourselves from interfering in it, but the movement of jobs and suppliers to places that can provide us, ourselves, with goods and services at a lower price or at a better price or even better quality in some cases, is probably against the interest of us as consumers, and the number of jobs which could be kept by somehow artificially saying you can't outsource would probably be more than made up for by the fact that the people who consume can consume better and cheaper with outsourcing. So there's a balance there, and maybe there's a matter of speed, but my own view is outsourcing. Most of the companies I'm involved with don't outsource because it's not the kind of, Amgen doesn't outsource anything. I mean, well, it outsources to Puerto Rico, but that's part of the United States. So, but I do know that people making software products and people that are designing, high production rate IT products are outsourcing. But I guess my assertion would be that's good, because when those goods come back to the United States, they're cheaper, when they come back, or even if parts of them come back, we consume better and cheaper because of them. Now, is there a balance between the number of jobs lost and our consuming better? It's like the argument about Walmart. We could argue about Walmart all afternoon. Some people say Walmart has, I'm one that say Walmart has provided goods to millions of people who've chosen to go to Walmart to shop because it's cheaper. I'm aware, we're not going to get into a Walmart meeting tonight, but it's kind of like that. I mean, is the ability to buy things at lower prices as a nation, because we are now, our companies that are resident here are shopping around to find ways to make their goods better and cheaper by at least providing some of the work elsewhere. What we do better than others, though, is marketing, figuring out markets, and figuring out how to serve markets, building products that suit those markets, and designing them. And taking science into engineering, we do that. The next step from engineering to product engineering, we are farming some of that out. So we could argue about this, and I don't have a firm answer, but my guts say, let free trade happen and take the advantages that come with it. It isn't a one-way street. That was a short answer. No, it's an important subject, Ray. Yes, sir.
Yes, can you comment on the fact that you talk about economic freedom? Isn't it true that venture capitalism as an industry, basically, is really unique to the United States, and in fact, this probably overwhelms any other area of the world? There's no such thing as venture capital, basically, in any of the democracies, let alone any of the former communist countries. And in addition, can you also comment on technology transfer is that taking place from institutions just like this? Is that taking place more and more now?
The answer to the first question is no, not now. There's lots of venture capital in Western Europe has later stage venture capital. They lost their taste for new ventures after 1999. But I don't know the numbers, but about $1 billion a quarter is going into new venture capital and growing new companies, maybe a little less. I remember like $800 million a quarter in Western and Europe in general. So venture capital exists in Western Europe, although if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I'd have said, yeah, it exists, but it doesn't amount to much. It does amount to much now. So it's an industry we invented starting back. Well, of course, when were the first ventures? They were far back as you want to go in our country, back certainly to 1850, when the technologies of oil refining and steam, using steam, and between 1850 and 1900, and the technologies of steel making built great companies. The technologies have changed, but the idea of backing companies is an old one. There's a wonderful book called The Visible Hand, about how the visible hand of management took the place of the invisible hand of a number of small companies. But venture capital in the United States has been exported in the basic idea to everywhere. There are venture capital companies in China. There are American venture capitalists who have opened branches in China. I happen to be involved in helping start a venture capital company in Norway, New Zealand, Poland and Czechoslovakia, Russia, and Romania. So I have some first-hand knowledge there. But the answer to your first question is there's plenty of venture capital, American style, I guess you'd call it, throughout the world. Africa doesn't have much, and there has been more charitable and government activities trying to help people get going. There's an interesting form of venture capital going on, though, in Bangladesh and in certain African countries. It's not anything like what you're thinking, but there are micro lenders and micro financial people in Sri Lanka, for instance, where they lend people enough money to bake some bread or have an oven or some very minor piece of capital goods. And the interesting thing about it is there's almost a perfect repayment rate, because in the village, the pressure to make good on your loans does not come from the lender. It comes from the other people in the town who want to have that money source remain there. It's a very exciting thing, and it's called micro-lending. In Africa, which doesn't have, well, except in Egypt and in South Africa, doesn't have much venture capital of the type you're describing. They have these countrywide there's a couple, three American groups. One's called, I can't think of the name of it right now, but there's an American company that raises money. They have a country manager in a number of those Central African countries who actually provide a little more money. In this case, they might buy a motorcycle, or someone who wants to have a delivery service, or they might buy some very small capital goods, like an oven or something like that, so people can engage in small business where they couldn't even get started without some kind of capital. And sometimes that's repaid and sometimes it isn't, but they've raised money in America to do that, and I don't have much knowledge about the repayment rate. I do know the micro-lending in Sri Lanka, for instance, is very, very, in Bangladesh, I should have said. I didn't mean Sri Lanka. In Bangladesh is a very, very successful program. But right now, there's plenty of venture capital activity in every continent, I would say, except Africa. Now, I'm sorry, what was the second question, sir?
Technology transfer.
Oh, yeah. There's a big, I've just been to parts of a two-day meeting at Stanford, or around Stanford, where 30 or 35 young Russian companies came to show their wares, let's call it. They came to hear talks from people like me about, and other more knowledgeable people about how they could get their technology noticed in the United States, how they could make deals with big companies here, how they could make deals with little companies here. So there's a very active effort, let's take Russia and the US, for people to discover the technologies in Russia and bring them here. The same thing's true in India and China. China has yet to, with the exception of some special biotech things I have heard about there, China is not exporting much technology to us. But India has a strong educational system. There's a lot of good engineering being done there, and we will see technology very shortly being transferred from India to the United States. But mainly, the technology transfer that's going on right now is from the more sophisticated laboratories of Western Europe and from Russia. But we are probably transferring more technology out of the country as people license our technologies than we're licensing in. But those are not numbers I have. But technology transfer is a big deal.
No, but I meant technology transfer between universities domestically here.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, is that becoming more and more the rule? I've often heard that some universities just don't do it.
Yeah. Every major research university has an office of technology licensing. Stanford is very early in that business, MIT. I mean, you can't name one that doesn't have it. So that the pattern typically is for when technology is developed with university assets in the university, then the title to that information, to that intellectual property belong to the university. However, when that is licensed to some, either a big company or to form a new company using that information, usually the pattern, which I think Stanford established but is widely done now, is to give 1/3 of the benefits of the, let's call it a royalty flow for the moment, to the university itself, 1/3 of it to the department, and a 1/3 of it to the investigators or investigator of that particular so that's the big arguments in technology transfer have occurred not so much with how do you split the swag, although that was a big argument to start with. The big arguments had to do with should a university take ownership in companies where its technology is used. The idea was it's somehow purer to take the flow of royalties than it is to take the discounted value of those royalties at a present value and then take stock for that. The people that took stock have made out much better than those waited around for the cash flow because companies have great value sometimes. There was a conference, I'm going in ancient history now, there was a time when that was a no-no, but now I do not know of a major university, including the University of California and its grand and glorious 14 campuses, that does not, in return for licensing technology, take equity if the equity deal looks good to those doing the licensing. So technology flows readily from American universities into business The universities seek it out. It's a source of revenue and income and capital value to them. And I believe that you would not find a major institution that doesn't do that. In Europe, however, it's been much more controversial. I remember, I'll drop a name here, but forgive me. I went out to Highgrove, which is where the Prince of Wales lives, and he had sponsored a meeting to talk about technology transfer in the sense that you mean it. So as we sat down at lunch, the Prince sort of moved around from table to table like Tom Watson does in foursomes when you play in those charitable tournaments. And so he came to sit at the table where I was, and I'd given my talk, and he was rushing off to play polo. But he asked me, because what is a good mechanism that is used in the United States? I described it in my talk, so he may not have been listening. But so I said, well, what we do is we pretty much, if the university gets benefited by research done in its laboratories, they split the proceeds from that, and just what I said, about a third to the university, a third to the department, a third to the investigator. And the guy from Cambridge practically came out of his chair and said, I would never do anything like that. So to him, getting money for the results of his research, even though it had value to society, I guess he didn't mind the university got it, but somehow that he would be corrupted by getting money for having pursued and improved human knowledge, he found it offensive. American professors don't feel that way. I don't know many. And the guy was, I don't know quite what his problem was, because since that time, that was about 10, 15 years ago, Cambridge, Oxford have all gone, without necessarily the percentages I'm talking about, they've all gone to a business where the university shares in, doesn't mind, that promulgates knowledge, but doesn't mind getting paid for it. I don't think his objection was even personal. I think he thought it wasn't right, if you're doing research in a university, that you don't promulgate your knowledge and the improvement of human life that might result from it free. One reason penicillin, by the way, took so long to get out into public use was that Fleming and I think it was Cambridge did not patent it, so that nobody wanted to start making it because they couldn't, the prices would have been so low. So it took a long time for penicillin to get out of the university, because they didn't bother to patent it. They just made it available to everybody, and so nobody wanted to manufacture it. But I don't know too much about France, but I think that the universities there are less conscious of benefiting financially from the developments that take place in the universities. Yes, sir. Did I finish answering your question? Yes. Good. Okay.
The financial services industries has consolidated a lot over the last 10 years. Accounting used to be big 8, now I think we're down to 4. Banks have become global. A lot of this is because of information technology. The venture capital industry seems to be a very intimate form of investing. And I'm wondering, as you look ahead, how will that industry evolve in a global marketplace? Are we going to see lots of local venture capitalists? Are we going to see large multinational firms? What's this industry going to look like, do you think, as we look forward?
Well, first I want to resist being called part of the financial service industry, but other than that, it's a good question. It has evolved, and I think the trend will continue. The practice of venture capital for many years was it's a local business. You got to be there. You got to go have a beer on Friday afternoon with the entrepreneurs. You got to have this involvement, frequent involvement, so you can't have but one place near where you're doing deals. Well, that model was broken. Not that he didn't make it local, but people began to open up branches of their businesses. So you have Alan Patrikoff, a great venture capitalist and a good friend of mine in New York, opened up Apex Partners, which has branches in a couple places in the United States, and then in a somewhat separate but similar operation in Europe with 2 or 3 offices there. So they do deals all over the place, and they have people there that look after their deals. Tim Draper, whom you may have heard of as the son of Bill Draper, my old partner, and a kid I've known since he was born, actually, has gone very widespread franchising of the Draper, Fisher, and Jervison name. So they wouldn't exactly branches, they're separate venture companies with separate backers, but they got the name and they gave clever little endings to the name, but it's basically Draper, Fisher, Jervison something. They got in London, 2 or 3 in the United States, New York, Seattle, of course the basic ones in Foster City near San Francisco. They've opened one in China. I can't even name them all. And they're about to open one in Kiev in Ukraine. So there is a imaginative younger venture capitalist who's saying, I'm not buying this local one branch, I'm going to open up a bunch of branches. Now each of the branches, however, are slightly different partnerships, and he raises money locally, but when there's some swag to be split, some of it comes back to his partners. Sequoia Capital, a very fine firm of a long time high performance, has recently, about 5 years ago, raised a fund, called it Sequoia, in Israel, and it did very well. They've just now opened one in China. So from a time when the founding partner, Don Valentine, would say, you'll never see us going overseas, I think Don's playing more golf and the other partners are moving out of the country some. So one trend will be the internationalization of venture capital, who will open branches, and the local treatment of your clients or your deals will continue, but you won't try to do it from Silicon Valley. You'll try to do it from other places. We're based in Palo Alto. We do deals. Well, typically we do them from between Seattle and San Diego. So we're through. We even did a deal in Santa Barbara once, but as hard as it was to get to. But we have a deal in just outside New York City. We have one in Roanoke, Virginia. For various reasons, we got involved with companies where our co-investors were local. So we didn't mind being there because we didn't have to go drink beer on every Friday afternoon in Roanoke. It's just too hard. But that's one trend. Another trend in the venture business, which is certainly taking place, is size. During those big boom years of the 90s, people began to raise all the money they could raise. So you had great big firms, but now you have people like us who do startups and make smaller deals, 50 million size, and we have some firms with 300 and 400 million who do later stage or big startups. So there's two major trends: are more branches and bigger venture funds, but doing later stage deals. There's another whole layer of people called private equity people who do great big deals, sometimes on top of the original venture deals. But I see people inching around to cut me off, so I'll just say thank you very much.
We are very honored to have Mr. Johnson with us today. He's a dear friend of the university, and we'd like to personally thank him for sharing his time and thoughts, ideas with them, and we welcome you back in the future. Thank you.